So on today with Ron Branstner, a guy who's no stranger to everybody in Minnesota, Wisconsin, all over the Midwest, really, and nationally, and through his work in all of these refugee resettlement issues, the issues of DAVOS, the Great Replacement. Ron has an urgent and compelling uh, uh, set of information, data points to give us today on the crisis at the border, a crisis that is even red pilling the normies, the last of the reasonable people on that left hand side are waking up to the fact that we have a humanitarian crisis. In the link below this video, we'll include the link to Ron Branstner's new movie. He has a fantastic documentary on Minnesota. So, Ron, why don't I be quiet and let you take it away? You're the guy people want to hear, okay?
No, a dialogue is always good, Wes. So, first of all, thanks again for inviting me. Most of you are aware, or maybe some of you are not unaware, but the takeover of America from the inside is becoming stellar at this point. Now, I've been talking about this for several years, almost a decade and a half. I came back from California when I was a Minuteman, which is the Civil Defense Corps, which we were voluntary people on the border, watching people coming over the border, and we were investigating the actual flow of people that were coming in from Mexico. That was actually in Arizona on a 50,000 square acre ranch, and the amount of people that were coming over was astronomical. We've seen dead bodies. We've seen helicopters overhead. It was like being in Vietnam. People don't understand. They don't have an idea exactly how bad the border is. Now the border has been very good and very, very quiet for the last 4 years. So we've been pretty happy to see that we didn't have an invasion under the Trump administration. But this new administration has opened the door up far worse than any other administration in the past, and more blatant than anybody in the past. And they're not just coming across the border. It's a little more difficult to get across because of the fence. They're actually being let in right through the gates at the port of entry. And they're coming in not only by the hundreds, but by the thousands. And what the most distressing part about this is they're not coming in there, they're trickery. They're using our laws against us. They're bringing children in first. It used to be that the men would come first, and then they would settle in, and then they would send for the families and the children. Now they're sending the children in first under a policy under the Obama administration that you have to be under 16 years of age and you have to be persecuted under sex trafficking and whatnot. So they're using children to be able to circumvent the system. And I see this as being very troubling because they under the Obama administration, they put them in camps, they put them in caged areas, and they were pretty spacious, not like what they say, they were fed. But it was the families that split them apart. It was the countries that split these children from their families. But when they get to the United States, the media says, no, it's not it's us. It was Trump that separated the children from their families. In fact, it was the opposite. So what we're seeing here is a travesty of child abuse, because they're separating the mothers and the fathers, leaving the children on their own for us to take care of so they can get admittance into the United States through this asylum seeking process under 16 years of age. It's very troubling because we're allowing this trafficking of children, of minors, to be let away from their families, and they have to face drug cartels. Because remember, when they're crossing the borders, they have to go through many obstacles. They have to go through drug cartels. They have to go through the military. They have to go through our borders. And the drug cartels are stopping them first, and they're getting the ransom from them. And once they get the ransom, most of them can't pay the ransom, so they can't advance any farther. Now, on that note, you're seeing a lot of Middle Eastern people come through the southern border, and they're paying large ransoms up to $30,000 to get past the drug cartels before they ever get to the border. Once they get to the border, I'm going to explain to you exactly how this works. So once they get to the border, if they cross, they have to pay the ransom. If they cross through the desert, They're picked up by the coyotes, take them to maybe a bus where they're picked up, and then they're taken. Many of them are transported to Phoenix, Arizona, and within Phoenix, they go into a housing facility, which they're held for ransom there. And then the families have to be called wherever they are in the United States, and they're called and they're saying, hey, we got your daughter, your son here, and you have to pay $2,000 in order for us to release them out of the holding house. This is a very lucrative business here, but it's child trafficking, not only for sex, for guns, for human trafficking. All of this is happening right now. And we're saying that we're allowing this to happen. And yet when it turns back onto us, the media changes it and says, no, it's the United States that's inhumane to these people because they're not uniting them back to their families. Once the children are let out into the public and back to a foster home or wherever they go, they're then allowed under the United Nations, the New York Declaration, which I believe we're a part of, and the 1948 Human Rights Commission. It says that you have to be reunited with your family. Mm-hmm. That's under the United Nations. So now we got to take the family that's over the border and bring them over and unite them with the children because we allowed the children to be here first. Well, that's not the way the system works. Mm-hmm. You got Section 207 and Section 208. 207 is where you're allowing people to come over here lawfully through the refugee resettlement program or through the asylum seeking program. Section 208 is when they get across through the program that we're seeing through DACA and the unaccompanied child minors. They get here, that's Section 208. Once they're here, they're under a little bit different guidelines. They don't get all the benefits that you would get from the refugee resettlement program, the stipend, which only lasts 3 months anyways. They're immediately thrown out of the welfare system and it becomes a cash flow for the $90 million means testing program where they're below poverty level. So this is a extremely humanitarian issue because we are allowing sex trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking to come across the border. We're allowing drug cartels to manipulate the border on the Mexican side. We're allowing the cartels that are human trafficking them on this side of the border and then transporting them across state lines. But one of the most atrocious things other than child trafficking is that our politicians, and I use Tom Emmer as one of them because he's in the area of Minnesota, is that our politicians are breaking the law because they're allowing and they're paying for the transportation of these minors to come across the border, and then they transport them out to different states. Under U.S. Code 8, Title 8, Section 8, U.S. Code 1324 A, B, and C 1, 2, 3, it says you cannot lawfully know that somebody is in the country illegally and transport them across state lines and harbor them into an area. Well, what our congressman not only did that, they paid $375 million to transport these immigrants across state lines, disperse them in the United States. That's illegal. What our congressman did was they did something totally illegal against the Constitution, harboring, transporting, and then putting them into the system, which taxpayers are paying for this. This is so insane because they know how to beat it around through a humanitarian issue of 1948 Human Rights Commission and the 1967 protocols and the New York Declaration, that we are just being destroyed with our own laws and where they're being used against us. And this is a travesty on every single level. And the people that are supposed to be stopping this aren't stopping it. Think about this. This year alone, the president wants to let 390,000 people, 300,000 people, let's just say, asylum seekers into the country. 300,000. That does not include any of the refugee resettlement program. We're not including Haitians, we're not including Cubans, we're not including the diversity, which is based off of color, visas. We're not talking H1 visas, H2 visas, none of the visas. We're talking just 300,000 people he wants to let across the border. That does not include family reunification. 300,000. That also does not include the 1.1 million that are already here in America that they let in last year. So right there, you've got 1.5 million. You've got all the refugees. You got the H1 visas. You've got all that. We're talking right now. We're allowing. The numbers are so staggering that I can't even get up to the numbers anymore. The door is open so bad, and we're getting an invasion from the outside in, and we're being taken over. This is the great replacement of the European culture, because we had the European culture coming here from 1880 to 1940. 4 million people came in during that period of time. When they came in that period of time, we needed the West to expand, because Minnesota in 1858 was when Minnesota became a state, and everything beyond that needed to be advanced. We needed homesteading. We needed to advance to the West. So they needed people to come in and occupy that land and take over that land and become part of the United States. Now that land has been occupied for the last 150 years. Now they're coming in and they don't have the opportunity of homesteading anymore. Now they come in, they get on welfare, or they do the cheap labor at the chicken places, the poultry places, the meat processing places. They're being used as cheap labor. Now, most of these people only stay here between 3 and 6 months. That's the average. I shouldn't say 3 and 6 months. They stay here at a job, and then they revolve the door at the processing plants. So once they get out of the holding houses in Arizona and they get transported across state lines, there's the poultry and processing plants, the meat processing plants that are waiting for them to come to do the cheap labor. They then assist them for 3 to 6 months, because that's usually how long it takes before they get caught that the person is illegal. Then they transport them on a meat market circuit, and they make all the way down to Kansas and all the way back up to Minnesota. It's called a meat market circuit, and they're transporting them from one place to another. You see buses actually pick them up on the weekends. So we are transporting. This is a legal operation that's happening throughout the state, and we're allowing it because nobody's stepping up to these politicians.
And Ron, it seems if we were importing politicians, if we were importing congressmen and importing mayors, those congressmen and mayors would have a very different perspective toward this human trafficking network. But instead, we're seeing the transportation of low-income, wage-depressing individuals who will turn a job market into a depression market, where at the same time that we're under lockdown and people are losing their leases and losing their mortgages and their savings accounts and their businesses. So everything about the U.S. economy is being depressed, and Timmy has us under lockdown, extends it into, the new year. We're into like 13 months of this. But at the same time that wages are being depressed for working class Americans, and middle class people are losing their livelihoods, they bring in this massive influx of individuals. By the way, hashtag stay home for you and me. Hashtag stay safe. Stay safe out there. Stay at home. Don't go out. Don't go to church. But meanwhile, bring in hundreds of thousands of individuals from the other side of the world, from East Africa, from Central and South America. They caught, I think it was 9 Iranians at the border with Mexico. What are these people doing? Trump had this locked down. There was the Stay in Mexico, Wait in Mexico program. And what that meant was that Mexico became serious about enforcing its southern border with Guatemala, because they didn't want all these caravans of people moving north. But back to you, Ron. I mean, what is this about? Davos, the Great Reset? Are we looking at, what's the motivation? Depress wage, take the value away from, how far do we allow this to go before we realize that our lives are being altered forever?
Well, firstly, I want to get back to you, because you made a really poignant statement. You said, what would it be if we imported these politicians? Well, we have been. We're bringing in Omar. Yeah. We're bringing in Keith Ellison from another state. We're bringing in Giuliani Hussein. This is in Minnesota. We're bringing in, you look at some of the politicians now, they're from Cuba, they're from Mexico. We are bringing them in, and we're bringing in their failed state ideas. So, hey, you said, what happens if? Guess what? They've already been doing it, and they're changing, and they're bringing their ideas that are altering the Constitution to a way of life that has destroyed Venezuela. You see what happened in Venezuela. Look at what happened to Chile, Somalia. I mean, and all these failed state ideas are coming here, and we're so naive that we believe that these people are going to be just like us. No, they're bringing their failed state ideas. Look at their backgrounds. Look at their history. You want to know a history? Look at Ilhan Omar. I mean,
and her father, Ilhan Omar's father, was a Marxist revolutionary trained in East Africa. And then there's some talk of her having attended. I mean, I don't know how reliable that is, but the training these people, the indoctrination they go through before they get here is really telling. Some of the people who committed atrocities in Minnesota had experience in some camps in training before they got here.
Wes, what about the grand poobah of this racist movement? What about Barack Obama? His father was a radical communist and a radical movement in the communist. He was killed when Obama was 2 years old because he was in the radical leftist movement where he belonged in, I believe, in Kenya. So the apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
Mm-hmm.
These people have infiltrated into our society. They are. And if you honestly believe that these 247 buildings that were burned down in Minneapolis was just an accident, no, you got to remember, because under you brought up the Great Reset. You must change the dynamics of the culture. You must change the dynamics of the economic system. You must change the attitudes of the people in the society in order to change the world economy that they want to change to. The great DAVOS. Listen to Klaus Schwab. I mean, he basically says exactly what they're going to do. Those 247 buildings down there was deliberately because they told the cops to stand down. They told these activists to get out there and burn. And I guarantee those areas that they burned down were deprived areas. They were lower poverty areas. They didn't need those. What they're now going to do is they're going to go in and they're going to revitalize that area to how they want it.
And there was a development program that was there were plans already in place for University Avenue from the Capitol down to the river. And the people that raised those buildings, so to speak, I mean, burned them to the ground. The properties that they skipped along University Avenue while they're moving along are sort of fascinating. I don't have my fingertips on the facts right now, but I understand there were some buildings that were left untouched, that were properties that certain groups were occupying. But these individuals that are ushering in, say, driver's licenses for all. They don't want us to have a voter ID program. They don't want a voter ID because that would be racist. But you need to give everybody a driver's license, and you need to allow everybody and anybody to vote. But what was I going to say? But meanwhile, you can't vet these people at the border. You have to just open the borders and let everybody come in. It's just not. It's not right.
What you said is this is let's stay on topic on the license just for a moment, because that's extremely important. I'm going to give you a scenario, and I want your listeners to understand this. If we allow illegals to have licenses in the state or the country, let's just say the state of Minnesota, and they vote to give them licenses, well, they have to have 3 different types of verification: their birth certificate, and they have to have proof of where they were born and whatnot. So they're saying that they have to have the proper identification for those people to be able to get a license, so we know who's driving on our streets. Once you allow them to have a verification or license, you violate 1324 A, B, and C 1, 2, and 3, which is the harboring law. So we now harbor. So there's one law we break. The first law they broke is to get here. Second law that the illegals broke was to use false identity of somebody else in the country. The third law was these politicians allowing the transportation of people over here. The fourth law is they went and used our taxpayer dollars to transport them over and then use our legal services against us. So we see this and all. Now, let's say that
one more law they're breaking is submitting false information. When you've got all of these individuals born on January 1st, of any given year, you've just submitted false information on a government document, making up a birthday that isn't really yours, and disproportionate. Also, the changing of names is out there too. But Ron,
well, that's a good point. But now you're talking about refugee resettlement, because they don't do that with illegals. Okay. They do that with refugee resettlement, and that's an interesting point, because now we diverted it. But just to get on that point,
sorry about that.
When you do that, you are admitting that you can't vet these people, because you don't know where they're from, where they're born. Just like Obama, we don't know where he's from, where he was born. We have to have false identification, false birth certificates. That's exactly. So if you stay on that point, that tells you that there is no vetting, isn't it? Because the family doesn't even know where their children are born, what year they're born, what date they're born. So they have to make up these false dates with the same names and screw up the systems.
Well, I wonder if there isn't another law being broken. Yeah, actually, it's a federal law that when applying for passports, at least one of the two parents need to be present. And at that time, when the application's submitted, you need to have an affidavit from the other parent that they're not present, but they give their permission for the other parent to make the passport application. And we see individuals here in Minnesota being presented by one, say, for example, 4 children being presented for passport applications by one adult woman who's already, say, in her 70s. So these 4 children being presented are not her own children, but she walks them up to the passport office. The passport applications are submitted, the documents are handed over, and no parent is present at that time. So these are some bizarre anomalies that we have, but Ron, I hope you can get back to what you were saying. But
no, but that follows in line to where I'm saying is when they separate the families at the border, and then somebody has to account for them here in the United States. That's exactly now we have to bring family reunification back into the process again, because somebody has to vouch for these kids. So now you go back over the border, and now you got family reunification, mothers, fathers, aunts and uncles, grandpa. We're talking an enormous amount of people for every individual. Remember, it's $107,000 just to take care of one person to admit them into the United States. That's not including means testing. And then you got their families to bring over. We're talking billions and trillions of dollars. It's $1 trillion industry every year. Now, I wanted to get back to this license things, because this is important. Let's say we have three points of identification. We allow this individual to drive in the city of, let's say, Wilmer. There's a lot of illegals in Wilmer want to work for the processing plant for poultry. And I asked several of the state representatives this question, especially one of them, Dave Baker. I posed this question to him, and he did not know how to answer it, yet he still voted for driver's license for illegals. Interesting enough, I posed this question. I said, Mr. Baker, let's say we allow them to have licenses to drive in Minnesota. He said, yeah. And so we know who they are from going from point A to point B, because you said you want them to be identified from the home to their place of business to drive on our streets. You said, that's correct. I said, so when you get to the place of business, what's their name then? And he paused and he said, well, the name that's on the license. I said, no, it can't be, because the place of industry that hires them under e-verification cannot hire somebody that's in the country illegally. It's a big fine. So they have to then have an alternate name when they get to work, because the license gives them a license to drive in Minnesota. E-verification doesn't give them the license or the authority to be able to work at a place of business. So now you've got first identity stolen, second identity given, third identity stolen again. And now they're working at a processing plant. They've got a stolen identity because they're working at a processing plant. They got their real identity at home, and then their children's identity. So now because a father can't get welfare for his children, but his children can get welfare. Do you see the dynamics of how this is all playing out?
Yes.
It's to break the system, to destroy the Constitution, destroy our civil rights, take away the culture that's here today. Klaus Schwab, the Great Reset, destroy America, destroy the middle class, and we replace the middle class with a new economy.
I've got a solid example for you there, Ron. I think you may know that I speak Spanish fairly well, and I went to a fast food chain, and the individual working there was, to me, obviously Hispanic. and we started talking in Spanish, and we were having a good time. And during the course of this conversation, I looked down at the name tag, and I saw that her name was Abdi.
Abdi, that's not Spanish. I have to tell you that. That's Somali. It means slave. And by the way, it means slave or servant.
Yeah,
slave or servant. Go ahead.
Yeah, how ironic is it that her name tag is Abdi, which, slave of Allah, or Abdi, servant or slave, black. Yeah. The language, literally the word Abid means black. But that to me was a shocking case in point. And I asked her about it. I said, how did you get a name like Abdi? And she laughed and she became a little flustered. And then I realized what was going on. So we talked a little more about it, but she was kind of shy. And I didn't want to make any trouble for the individual. But the corporations that are knowingly hiring people who are here illegally, or in that case, I'm thinking, are other people acting as middlemen to traffic illegals to corporations and companies? Like,
I know for a fact they are.
So what I accidentally then Ron, this is a case in point. I would encourage Americans and communities to understand that when we see something that's not correct, someone's being farmed out to that business, someone's being trafficked into that business so that your burger can be a certain price, so that your meal, so that your landscaping will be cheaper, so that your garden work will be a lower price. These individuals are being enslaved by these masters to go out and work in a fast food joint. So I talked to some people about that situation. For a fact that this is going on. It seems like the congressmen and the mayors know this is going on, and then they have these feel-good meetings. Elected officials will go to church basements and talk about how wonderful they are because we need driver's licenses for all. But if you're engaging in one of those church basement meetings where you're patting yourself on the back for helping these people get a better life, you're depressing wages for young Americans, and you're engaging in defending human trafficking. So I would say shame on those churches that are pretending to be going about the Lord's business when in fact they're actually engaging in human trafficking. So the leftist groups want to. I could name the churches. I could name the leftist groups in Minnesota that are doing this. Funny that they call us the haters.
Right.
Funny that they call us the racists, even anyway, the ironies abound, Ron, don't they?
It's ironic, isn't it? They use race to be able to facilitate human trafficking, use race against us. And then when it comes to it, they say we're the racists for not accepting it. But they're the ones picking people of color to come over here to the cheap labor. You don't see them going over to Germany or Switzerland or Norway to get these pancake flippers over there. No, they go to the lowest parts of the country, the world, and bring these people over here. Talk about race baiting, talk about human trafficking and what do you call it? Business trafficking, because they're trying to keep the wages lower and trying to change the economies. Yeah, there's no doubt, and we don't acknowledge the fact that these people are haters, because they always go back to they side with the church, a Unitarian church, for example.
Very good example, especially in Rochester. But you hit it on the nail. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and who's the big wig at the Unitarian Church in Rochester?
Mayor Norton, Mayor Kim Norton. So her own church hosts these groups in Minnesota that call for driver's licenses for all. She hosts Attorney General Keith Ellison and Democrats like Regina Ann Roadfuss Mustafa and so forth.
Do you see how she hides behind the church?
Yes.
So they always hide behind the one thing that can always give them a leverage up. It's kind of like they could fight from both sides. They could call somebody a racist and be a racist at the same time. But they say, well, I'm part of the church. We're good people. Yet they're a two-sided symbol. They two faces facing this way. One is I can always argue both points. If I want to say I want to save somebody, I'm on this side. If I want to protect somebody, and call you a hater for what I'm doing over here, I can also face this. I'm a two-faced individual.
The cognitive dissonance, right? It's astonishing. And then to be depressing wages for people, at the very time when we're telling Americans to stay home, the cognitive dissonance of, say, shut down, take all the value that people have created, shut down businesses, close restaurants, close the bars, take back the leases from local control, and then bring in individuals who are going to, fulfill their agenda. To me, it's ironic to close a restaurant and then open it up as a student lounge for people from the University of Minnesota. It's also grooming behavior of the young to show them this is where you get your benefits from. The state, the Mama Merkel in Germany, right? Well, we have Nanny Norton in Rochester, and she's doing the same. It's this 1-2 punch of you folks are going down, and then here we go. But it's wage slavery. It's wage slavery. The people they're bringing in are desperate for jobs. So like Bella D'Angelo's show the other night, you made some really great points on that program. And maybe I can give the link in the description below to her podcast as well. Very powerful information conveyed. Anything else you can add?
Yeah, I need to make this point very clear. The invasion that we had in Minnesota started in Austin, Minnesota in 1985. The Austin mayor, the previous one, and the one before that, Rourke, Bonnie Reitz, Tom Steen, all of these, Tom has not been to Blandon, but he supports the Blandon Foundation, where they train these people up in Grand Rapids, Minnesota. So you've got training facilities, you got mayors in Austin, you got a mayor in Worthington. You got a mayor in Rochester, a mayor that the past mayors of Wilmer, Minnesota, the past mayors of Long Prairie, Minnesota. Isn't it interesting? If you look at these past mayors, most of them have been to the Blandon Foundation Retreat Center. And the mayor of Wilmer, Minnesota, Austin, and Long Prairie all said they would have never multiculturalized their city if it wasn't for the direction of the Blandon Foundation. So why are we not looking into that direction? Blandon is 7,000 people. They've trained 7,000 people in the state of Minnesota and growing. They are training these leaderships, and they're getting in positions of power of the Democrat groups, and they are the modern day slave camps of today. This is a plantation, and whether you like it or not, Minneapolis, St. Paul, Austin, Minnesota, and Rochester and Wilmer are plantations, modern day plantations of slave labor. Don't leave the plantation, or we'll give you a license. But they don't want them to get licensed. Well, don't leave the plantation. Don't go out to the rural community because they're bad people, right? Because they'll tell on you that you're where you're at, that they have to send you home. Stay here, mow our yards, do our dishes, flip our burgers. We'll use you for cheap labor.
And we'll get a 400-hour tax credit hiring you, and then when we're done with you, after we'll document you from day one and write you up, and then fire you at the end of 400 hours are up, and then we'll get a new tax deduction by hiring, say, a refugee under the refugee program. And I wonder if we couldn't do at some point an entire segment on the Blandon Foundation alone. I think it would be tremendous for people to hear all about the Blandon Foundation specifically and how much it's done to train Minnesota politicians. Who pays for the Blandon Foundation? Who's behind it? Which politicians have actually been there? Because they are. It's an indoctrination process that people go through. They have to pass that psychological evaluation.
Myers-Briggs test.
There you go. So, but Ron, is there any other things you want to say in closing? I'll pass the torch back to you because we're getting to the point where if we go on much longer, the analytics of the YouTubes will shut this video down and not recommend it. So do you want to make a quick plug?
So here's the deal. Let's just iron this out. Minnesota is a modern day slave trade unit, right? There are 24 different counties in Minnesota, not northern Minnesota. We're talking southern Minnesota. That's where your farmers are at. That's where your plantations are at, from Minneapolis straight down, Wilmer straight down. So this is so if you are against, if you go ahead and you open up that book and you say, my gosh, slavery was atrocious. Well, yes, and then you support what's happening in Minnesota, you're no different than the 1800s. All we did is we took the chains off the people, and we off the individual, off the slave itself, and we put the slaves on the modern day citizen to take care of you and them, to pay their taxes, to pay. And while this is all happening, while we're paying for it, who gets away with it? The farmer gets away with it. The business gets away with it, because they get cheap labor. They get the tax incentives. They get the tax breaks. They get to roll over their inventory. Because I guarantee what you see in Austin today will not be there 5 years from now. What you see in Wilmer today won't be there 5 years. They rotate their crops. This is a crop rotation of slave labor. And if you don't like this, well, tough. I don't care. This is what's exactly happening, and it's been happening. And Minnesota is one of the considered, in my opinion, Southern Minnesota is a modern day slave trade, and the racists are right here. And they disguise themselves as Unitarians, interfaith dialogue people, and they push the big businesses into the Minnesota Council of Foundations, as they all get behind. And here's the deal, if I may, most of this funding that we see for this goes from taxpayers. These foundations get grants, and then they use their grant money against you for legal services, and then they get an endowment through the business, Hormel Foundation and Hormel, QP, Quality Pork, Jenny, and as you go on, those business are, they probably do it legally to hire them, but then their foundations are getting grant money to facilitate the movement. Look at a place called the Welcoming Center in Austin, Minnesota. It was created out of the city council, which was created by Apex, which was created by Austin and the Blandin Foundation.
We have a similar welcoming center, similar setup here in Rochester, where the Democrat Party has their headquarters on the first floor, and the entire building is a one-stop shop for immigrant services, signing up for healthcare through MNsure, getting your Section 8 housing, getting your welfare, getting signed up for, I mentioned medical. You can get a vehicle through the Ready to Work program, I believe there. There's also immigrant services, lawyers and attorneys available. You can get a chiropractic visit right on the spot. It's a building set up for...
they wanted to do that in Austin too.
The real estate agent in that building as well, who actually operates out of that building, and then he occasionally runs for public office. But these individuals never stop with the tricks. And it reminds me of, I was thinking as you were talking, I was reminded of a book by Thomas Hardy that isn't widely read, called Tests of the Dubervilles, where it's an economic system where every year the lords of the manor would exchange data between themselves about how many workers were needed over here and how many workers were needed over there, and they would rotate them between the privately held lands. And this kind of boon work, they would farm out the laborers. So you would be conscripted into a dairy farming job, or then you'd be sent over to dig potatoes, or if they needed, the workers were just milled around between the centers. Oh, maybe you're going to work at Amazon.com distribution center in the Twin Cities, right? And end up protesting about the air quality, right? Hasn't worked out well for Ariane's manufacturing either, or for these little companies where they make desserts or cookies even. People end up protesting about the wages and the working conditions, although they're coming from some super poor areas. But you reminded me of that book in talking about this new economic order that we're on. Sort of strange. We're making some big connections here today, Ron.
Well, sure are. Just remember, this is my last point I'm going to make. The Minneapolis-St. Paul, which is a sanctuary city policies, all right? They don't want them to leave, but yet they criticize us out in the rural area for not protecting them and helping them. And when they burn the buildings down, they want our money to take care of their buildings. You know what? Here, let me just share this with you, Wes. We give them their windmills and their power. We give them their solar energy. We sell it to Minneapolis. We take our prime piece of merchandise, which is land out here, and we build these power plants all over through farmers' yards. We're taking the brunt of this to pay for the Minneapolis sniveling little brats who, once they spill their milk, they're like children. They spill their milk, they cry for milk more, and then they spill their milk again, and then they want us to pay for it. You know, I'm tired of supporting these sniveling little crybabies, and I hate to say it like that, but it's a fact. Let's just say how they are. They're children that need a babysitter, and the rural communities are babysitters. We walk around like little nannies with little tie-up shred, and every time they spill their milk, you burn a city down, they want us to pay for it. They spill their milk, they want us to pay for it. They want immigration reform, they want us to pay for it. You know what? If you want it, you pay for it. Otherwise, get the hell out of our face, because we give you your milk, we give you your meat, we give you your electricity. Now, stay the hell away from us. We don't want any of your liberal ideas.
We gave them a $22 million public housing project that they burned to the ground, 20 brand new state-of-the-art public housing for a group of individuals. And then on social media, they're saying, burn it down, burn all that shit down, end quote. They're saying that on that left-hand side. We just keep providing value. They just keep, you know, like the milk, like you said, they're sniveling little brats.
Well, how many times does a mother stop telling her child to stop touching the stove before he finally gets burned? I'm tired of being burned by these guys, these inner city people who build this utopia of slave labor and then come out to our communities and buy all the property up around the lakes, act like they're Pontius rights, and then they go back to the inner city and use slave labor to do it again. They're bringing that crap out to us. You know what? Minneapolis, St. Paul can go to hell, as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I would be in agreement with Louis Farrakhan as far as having their own territory. Let's just let them have their own little state in Minneapolis, St. Paul. Give everybody 90 days to move out who doesn't want to live in Chaz, who doesn't want to live in a failed state. Give everybody 90 days to sort out their affairs and come join us in the real America. And just let all those folks on the left-hand side that want to stay in a worker's paradise where there's no police and no enforcement, you know, similar to that area around the George Floyd Square that they've got set up. Anyway, we're digressing, but Ron, the conversation.
We're on a roll, Ron.
We're on a roll. We'll save it for the next engagement because, folks, Ron, we got to have you back in Rochester. You fired up the crowd before. We got to have you back. Ron's on his way to another speaking engagement today. Let's continue this conversation. We could go in so many different tangents, but at some point we got to do a whole segment on the Blandin Foundation and just talking about what they are and what they do.
Yep. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Ron, thank you.